Good morning and welcome to the Raben Report. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, so get ready to get triggered. Hello and welcome to the Raben Report. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, and with me is part of my expert panel, Amara and Samuel. How are you guys?
Great.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Now, Jordan is away today, and after a lot of effort and discussion, we've decided to stick to just us three. No matter, you can expect a great show. To begin, all opinions expressed are not those of Ryerson or Ryerson faculty and are only those of the individual commentators. Viewer discretion is advised. I'd just like to start by thanking a few people for the enormous support they've given me and us in preparing today's show. Kara Ho, who proposed this topic, Elvira Caria, and my parents. It was difficult, but we managed to find a topic after a lot of work, and I'm very thankful for their support, and as well as to my team. So thank you. Before we get to the news, we'd just like to remind our viewers that we are now available everywhere. Did you miss the Raben Report's live show? No problem. Now you can catch up on all past episodes on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Of course, you'll only be able to see our crazy reactions right here on Facebook and the clips on Instagram, but if you're driving to school, doing some homework, now you can listen to us anywhere, anytime. Coming up a little later in the show, we'll be talking about our main topic, adoption. But first, let's take a look at our top stories in our weekly update, starting with, as you called it, Amara, Plategate. So the Ontario government has created new license plates that are causing issues for motorists, for police officers, because they seem to be impossible, if not just difficult, to see the plate itself at night. What are you guys' take on that, Amara?
I think it's just another example of Doug Ford's shitty governing. One of the MPPs actually called the older plates liberal plates, and they're not. The Liberals haven't changed the plates in a super long time. The last time the plates were changed, that was a Conservative thing. Definitely just seems like, he wants to make his mark. I think they're ugly, and I think it's just, again, indicative of his entire resume as premier, that they are literally not working and not able to be seen. So
Sam?
Regardless, they're just ugly. They look like Play-Doh.
And the letters aren't raised or anything.
Yeah. The prior Canada has a very boring license plate. So if you'll travel through the US, you'll find that a lot of license plates, they have, some kind of the state animal or some kind of...
I think Manitoba's might have a little bit of scenery on it.
I'm just thinking, I like the Quebec license plate a lot because of the motto.
What's the motto?
Je me souviens.
Oh, yeah, right.
I will remember. Very,
very Quebec.
Very Quebec. But yeah, the new license plates stink from an aesthetic perspective. The old ones were plain and boring. So yeah, and I think Ford definitely has a thing with, like you said, almost a vanity obsession with making his mark. I remember the billboards that he put at the border, and I've seen them at the border between
Open for business.
Yeah, between Quebec and Ontario, and I guess is Manitoba? That's directly west of.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, good thing. I remembered that. But those borders, I believe they cost hundreds of thousands, or at least $100,000. For the design and implementation, and they were why?
Yeah, I think the plates are ugly. The old plates were plain, but I definitely liked the old motto better than Open for Business. I think yours did. Ontario, this is off topic, but Ontario is very large. Mm-hmm. We think of Thunder Bay as northern Ontario, and it's not really north.
It's not even halfway up.
Yeah, when you look at an actual map of Canada. And we do have a lot of nature in Canada, and it is beautiful, and I think yours to discover motto just kind of, showed that. I think especially living in Toronto and Southern Ontario, we can be very vain and self-centered, but there's a lot of Ontario that you can discover, but now the province isn't encouraging you to, so that's sad.
I don't even like yours to discover, sorry, Elliot, because it's like some third-rate tourist motto.
That's what they usually are, though.
I know, but like New Hampshire's live free or die. That's awesome. It is great. I love it.
Also, Ontario doesn't really have like a super militant history like Quebec does. Like,
You're
what
right.
would it even be? Ontario's pretty much been the
they
center
could
of
they
Canada
could say
since
like
Canada
the Great
began.
White North or something like the Free White North.
I
Something
think that would be
I know, obviously it's not,
Hilariously,
but there's something like something people yours to discover.
No, I think Great
Hello.
White North, like people call Canada the Great White North. Because the Arctic is white and snow is white.
Yes.
But I think, especially if Doug Ford tried to make our motto
that'd
the
be funny.
Great
Yeah,
White
yeah,
North,
okay, I
that
didn't
would
think of
not go over well. People are definitely going to look at that as a racial thing, but
I mean,
it doesn't have to be.
What do you propose though as a license plate? Because
I think they should just go back.
No, I would
It's
like just something plain.
slogan wise. Not
I really liked yours to discover. I think Ontario is beautiful, and we should encourage people to discover it, both Ontarians and tourists.
I would have to think about that, but it's definitely something better.
Open for business is garbage.
Yeah,
though.
that's terrible.
I
It's
would,
like
yeah, that's
it's like a job fair, or like welcome to Ford Power
Like,
Plant. We are open for business.
The
Like
obviously the province wants economic opportunities and stuff like that, but it at the end of the day is not a business. It's supposed to be doing the best for Ontarians, so
yeah.
it's just another symbol of Doug Ford's shitty premiership.
What's your take on that, Sam? Do you believe that this is just another example of why Doug Ford's bad, or this is just a minor setback?
Well, I don't like his government because it's not terribly conservative from my definition, but I don't like license plate. All right, I've seen them. They're ugly.
And I think more so than them being ugly, the fact that you can't see them at night is a pretty big deal.
Under
it's
certain
dangerous.
conditions.
You need to be yes, but you should be able to see. And I've read that some cameras can't pick them up. Of course,
Yeah, that's where the
liberal
issue
media
came
is going
from.
to be very excited to shit on anything Doug Ford does.
Yes,
But
I think that's the biggest
I-
drive of the story is just shitting on Doug
Yes,
Ford.
but I think that if they're bad plates, they're bad plates, and you need to be able to read license plates. It's like the whole point of having a license plate. So they're ugly. I don't like the slogan, but more so than anything, if they don't work, they need to be changed.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's pivot now to down south, where the latest Democratic debate took place. It had 6 candidates, them being Michael Bloomberg, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and Pete Buttigieg. Right?
Yes.
Okay, that's all.
I was
just wanted
shaking
to
my
make
head
sure.
because I don't like Pete Buttigieg.
Oh, yeah,
not
okay.
because
I just
you're
wanted to
wrong.
make sure I got them all right. But apparently this was a first for Michael Bloomberg because he wasn't at the previous debates.
Yeah, I don't think he was.
And
No, he wasn't even in the Iowa caucus or New Hampshire primary. He wasn't on the ballot.
so what did you guys think of the debate? Amara, we're going to start with you. I mean, I know who you're supporting,
Yeah,
but
I'm a Bernie bro, but I think Bernie did a really good job. I think Warren did a really good job. I think Bloomberg was, shown to be what he is. I'm glad that happened. And I think Pete Buttigieg is gross. And I think that was all shown on the debate, during the debate.
what's your take on the other people you didn't mention? So you said you don't like Pete Buttigieg. What about Amy Klobuchar, Joe Biden? What's your take on
I
them?
don't think they made a really large impact, which is why I didn't mention them. So yeah, there's only been 2 states, but I think they're not doing too well. I think this will probably help Warren. I think she did really well coming out against Bloomberg. She did that pretty hard, and I thought it was good. He deserved it. And I think Bernie did pretty well. He's going to face the whole socialism, how are we going to pay for it, all that, all of those criticisms the entire campaign. So I think he did pretty well at answering those questions.
Fair enough. And Sam, what's your take?
I thought definitely knives were out, and that could be attributed to 2 things: that it's getting closer to Super Tuesday, which is pretty much the determining stretch of the race.
And for our audience that doesn't know what Super Tuesday is, do you mind elaborating?
So I believe it's only, is it Democratic and the Republican?
I'm not sure.
No? Okay, well, Super Tuesday just means that there's a Tuesday of every
Election
cycle where a large amount of states are all doing their caucuses or primaries at the same time.
There's a wild amount of delegates
Yeah.
up for grabs, over 1,000.
Which it includes Texas, I believe, which has a lot.
Does it include California?
It might. I'm not sure.
And those are obviously 2 huge states.
The biggest. So it is a determining
It's a big deal.
night, and they can make or break campaigns. But I think it was either that they realized they were getting closer to that date, and it was really their opportunity to make or break it, or that Michael Bloomberg was on the stage, and they just saw not a political individual in the traditional sense, easy pickings, but he is second in the poll, so they thought maybe they could take some of his momentum, I guess.
I think it
Easy
was
to criticize. They could easily criticize him and his, I guess, previous statements to kind of boost their own media spotlight.
I mean, politics is politics, so they're politicians, and of course, the conveniently timed leaked speech about the stop and frisk stuff is obviously a great opportunity for the other candidates, but I do think that needs to be addressed. If I were living in the States, I'd be pretty uncomfortable having a president who said the things he said about visible minorities. So I think he does need to answer for the things that he said. And all of the NDAs with women who've accused him of sexual harassment and gender discrimination. He just needs to answer for those things. I would want to know.
He just needs to, like Trump did when he was criticized in almost the same way. He just has no charisma. The way he responds to those questions is the way someone in a board meeting would respond to it with no, outside audience. I remember we mentioned this briefly during the beginning of the show, or before the show started, about Trump when he was criticized about the derogatory things we said about women, and he said very charismatically to Megyn Kelly, "Only Rosie O'Donnell," and everyone laughs because
it's also a different audience. Wasn't that a Republican debate?
Yes, but at that time, I think most people didn't really like Trump or were uncertain about him. But that just shows it wasn't that issue with him and women wasn't really taken seriously again until the Pussygate. Oops, the you know what I'm talking about. The
grab them by the blank.
Yes, that emerged later in the campaign. But I think that just shows, both rich, non-traditional candidates, but the difference in charisma really is very stark, very obvious. There's the word I'm looking for.
I just really hope. I don't think Bloomberg will get the nomination. I don't think people like him, and I'm glad for that. Is there any other job that not having any experience in that field is a selling point? That's ridiculous. And you shouldn't run a country like a business. So I don't think we should have more businessmen in politics. And yeah, I think they also pretend. Sorry.
Go ahead.
They also pretend to be very, like you said, non-traditional, which is what they run on, because people don't like politicians. But both Bloomberg and Trump are, again, the embodiment of the establishment of the 1%. So I hope that's obvious for people who were maybe considering Bloomberg, that I haven't even encountered anybody who seriously supports him.
Well, there was a report that came out that a lot of people, in Hollywood and the elite, actually support him secretly. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, that makes sense. Of course, Hollywood and elite support him. He's a billionaire, and he's going to do good things for other rich people. So that doesn't surprise me.
And he has a lot of money to throw around. I wouldn't be surprised if he's. What was that joke on Twitter that he was paying $100 for influencers to promote his stuff?
Yeah,
this is funny.
Yeah,
this
yeah.
Is funny.
And he's talked about the fact that he can basically he doesn't need any donations. I don't think basically saying you're going to buy the nomination is a selling point. It's not democratic.
Yeah, he said that the president's job was a managerial job, and I thought that was kind of funny to describe it like that. But he did have some interesting quips. He turned to everyone and said, "Am I the only one here that started a business?" It was dead quiet, and he was like, "Okay, good," and then he continued with whatever point he was making. So he definitely has some charisma, but it's lacking as far as oligarchs go.
Well, let's cut to international news now, where there was a shooting rampage in Germany by a right-wing extremist. Amara, you brought that up in our meeting when we were discussing what to talk about in a weekly update. What's your take on that?
Whoa, Bill. Oh, sorry.
It's horrible, obviously. People are dead, innocent people. That sucks. I think, I think we need... I think there are a lot of issues going on in the world right now. I think neoliberalism and globalization is, at an all-time high, and I think a lot of regular people are hurting for that, and I think that a lot of people are looking for someone to blame, and for a lot of people, that's immigrants. And I think that was what the issue was in Germany. I think he targeted Turkish people, and Germany has a big Turkish immigrant population. So I think that's the explanation for that. And I just think it's horrible. And racism and hate and murder are bad things.
And what do you think the response is going to be? Because Germany is not not foreign, but it's not uncalled for there to be a lot of racism incidents in Germany in recent past.
How recent are you talking about?
within the last
Within the last
year,
100 years?
Within the last 3 years, 5 years, there have been a lot of incidents that come out. So what do you think the response is going to be this time? Is
From
it going to
who?
be different from Germany, from the world?
Well, Merkel has already responded, and she obviously said racism and hatred is a poison. Nobody, sane supports murdering people. Even I'm sure people who are against immigration would not support murdering innocent people. So I think that obviously the elephant, I don't know if it's the elephant in the room, Germany has a history of racism and atrocities and genocide. But if you know anything about Germany nowadays, they're very, I don't know what the word is, but they apologize,
Very
they pay
critical of
reparations.
themselves.
Yes. Like students in Germany are brought to concentration camps on school trips. They're very educated on the past. So I don't think in the greater German society, there's a lot of support for racism and extremism. And I even think nationalism is on the rise all over the world. It's probably a lot harder to even name a German nationalist party than one in North
AfD.
America. No, I don't mean name as in think of one. I mean think of a name for your nationalist party, considering the last party the last powerful party in Germany that had nationalist in the name was the Nazi Party. So, I think there's a lot less space actually for nationalism and racism in Germany than there may be in a country that doesn't have the history that Germany does.
I see that generally changing. I know the AfD, the party I mentioned, is Alternative for Deutschland, obviously in German. I don't know.
But yeah, that's what it's a nationalist party, but
Yeah,
they're
of
not going
course.
to put nationalist in the title.
Obviously they have to, they have to step on a lot of eggshells. And I think this individual was obviously a sick person. I think after he committed the murders, he went home and killed his mother and then shot himself.
Yeah.
So I don't think this could be attributed to any, popular right-wing immigration sentiment, not immigrant sentiment, because it was obviously a sick person, who shoots their own
I
mother.
don't think that's true. I think that people can be sick and also support
Yeah, of course,
popular
but-
right-wing anti-immigrant parties and platforms
Sure,
and
but
people.
I don't think the existence of those movements or those sensibilities in politics is what naturally would lead to.
No, he's
yeah.
obviously a sick person, but I
Yeah.
think that this is connected to the rise in nationalism
Mm.
we're seeing. And I think that comes from people having harder lives because people are not doing well economically.
Yeah.
Right. Well, turning lastly back to Canada, very briefly, we're going to mention the fact that the pipeline protests continue. We're going to talk about that on another show when Jordan returns. But currently, CN Rail has laid off a bunch of
1,000.
1,000
Temporarily
workers.
laid off
Temporary,
1,000
yeah.
workers.
I knew if I said they laid off 1,000 workers, you'd be like, temporarily.
It is temporary.
I know.
Also,
and I made sure to look at that too.
hundreds of millions of dollars of goods are just
it's
in limbo right
apparently
now.
it's $480 million per day
Yeah.
is left, which, I mean,
It's a lot of
it's
money.
affecting the economy.
A lot
So
of things.
we're going to discuss that in depth on another show. But now let's move on to our main topic this week, which is adoption. Children. Every child is a new life in the world. Unfortunately, not all children are able to enjoy that life with their biological parents. According to the Adoption Council of Ontario, as of 2011, there were over 30,000 children in care across Canada. In Ontario, there were approximately 17,000 children and youth in foster care. However, over the last decade, the number of public adoptions has increased. Ontario families are stepping up to the plate at an increasing rate. On today's show, we examine this trend and the important facts and issues affecting adoption. Later in the show, we'll discuss what makes parents good parents and how Ancestry.ca and similar platforms have changed the way we reconnect with biological family. As a reminder, we are live on Facebook, so make sure to comment on our feed to have your thoughts read live on air. So we're going to start with what we asked on Facebook and Instagram. Sam, what did we ask our Facebook audience?
So we asked, got you. Would you adopt? And 84% said, I would adopt. 16% said no, I would not adopt, and with 37 votes, I don't believe I can see which way that went yet because it's been too soon since the poll took place.
No, you should be able to see it. But right now, while you get that ready, I'll pull up our Instagram results, and it's quite surprising because we had 22 votes. Only one said no, and 21 said yes, they would adopt.
Who was it? Call them out. No.
I'm not calling them out.
Yeah, I thought it was you.
No.
No. I know who it is, and they voted on both polls. But regardless, it's still quite interesting to see the dynamic, the difference. There's always a difference between our Instagram and our Facebook polls.
Yeah, I think people who use Facebook are probably going to be more conservative. Like, on a whole, obviously, in university, you kind of use Facebook as, like, for accepted groups and stuff. But I think people who, like, I guess, spend time on Facebook are probably more conservative than the people who, like, are scrolling through Instagram.
Right. Well, let me open that up to you guys. Would you ever adopt?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I would never adopt. No, I would adopt maybe.
If I had issues, without being too specific, if I ever had issues, had my own children, I would consider adopting, but I doubt that would happen. It's unlikely, just statistically, it's unlikely.
Okay, so even if you didn't have issues with conception, you wouldn't adopt?
No.
Okay. Amara?
I mean, I would adopt maybe. I don't have like my life planned out, so it's possible. I would not say it's impossible that I would adopt. Also, if I wanted to have kids and I couldn't, I think it's more likely that I would adopt then. I think that's what a lot of people do. So, yeah, maybe.
Well, adoption, it used to be a long time ago. It used to be very shameful and secretive. Is this still the case, or is it a lot more common? Is it a lot more accepted?
Well, you said that the number's increasing of adoption, so it is more common, and I think it's accepted. Like, I don't know, like, would you ever meet an adopted kid and be like, ew, you're adopted? Like, I don't think so. So, no, and I think people view parents who adopt children as generally, like, generous and nice people, so I don't think society has a negative view of adoption. I think maybe, like, for the person who's adopted, maybe, of course, there's always the question of why you were put up for adoption in your biological family, but I don't think that overall we view adoption as negative.
I mean, a lot of the time in film or television, there have been, visuals, and in real life, there have been cases where people have been bullied because they were adopted. Do you think that has been on the decline as well, or do you think that's still prevalent?
I don't think they're, like, I didn't go to school with any kids who were adopted as far as I knew, so I'm not sure. But, like, if you're talking about, like, elementary school, kids will bully kids for anything. Like, I remember kids with red hair used to get kicked because of, like, South Park. So there's, like, and, people, like, name their children strategically to minimize bullying at school. So kids are going to bully kids for absolutely any reason they can think of. So I don't think that that's a huge, should be a huge factor in the way we look at adoption.
Sam?
Yeah, I think kids will, if we're looking at just what kids say, they'll bully literally anyone. I remember I was called Baloney Sam when in, like, grade 1. And I was trying to think, like, I'm thinking about it now. Like, Sam Baloney doesn't even rhyme. It's not even clever. Kids will just say
6-year-olds just think baloney is a funny word.
Yes, it is kind of a funny word.
But kids are stupid. So
Yeah,
they do stupid things.
Anything that's different or, like, worth that stands out, they'll make fun of.
I mean, this is off topic, but have you seen that blue eyes, brown eyes experiment?
Yes,
that's
with
pretty
Oprah?
famous. No, the woman who did it, she did it, like, in the 60s, I think. I think it was around the time MLK was assassinated, and it was a group of, like, we know what the experiment was, like a classroom of white kids.
I don't.
Well, for our audience and for Sam.
And I think they were, like, around third, fourth grade, and it was a classroom of all white kids. And she was trying to show them what racism was. So she told them that kids with blue eyes were better than kids with brown eyes. And then we kind of saw how that progressed, and the kids with blue eyes started bullying the kids with brown eyes, and the kids with brown eyes started performing worse on tests and stuff. So, yeah, like you said, anything different. Literally, like,
so they've subjected kids to.
Yeah, it wouldn't happen in 2020.
Yeah,
this happened in the 60s. But
immoral.
all I'm trying to point out is kids are going to, like, in a classroom of very homogenous, like, all white American children, they were still able to, like, totally, like, horribly bully each other over one of them having blue eyes or brown eyes.
Well, they lied to them.
Yeah,
and they look at teachers or parents as, like, an authoritative figure.
My point was just that children are willing to make fun of people for absolutely any difference they can
that's true.
find.
And that same experiment was done on Oprah. That's why I mentioned it.
She's done a lot more experiments. That was just
but
the original one.
she had like a racism expert, very famous professor, come on the show, and they basically treated their audience that way.
They do it
and
with adults now.
it. Yeah, which was also interesting because
it's
they
very
turned
interesting.
upon each other as well.
Yeah, I think. Well, yeah. I mean, we're all children, right? But you're asking about kids, so yeah, people tend to pick on people who are different than them.
Now, I ask, looking at those two examples of the adults on Oprah and that experiment that happened with students, do you believe that this bullying for differences stems from adults? Do you believe that it's
No.
because of adults, or is it just innately?
Well, are we talking? Like, is racism innate or taught?
Or just
like,
just
it's a big topic.
Well, they can have non-racist bullying.
that's what I mean. So, like with a kid who's adopted.
Yeah, I think it
yeah.
exists, but I don't think it's the fact that they're adopted would make them more of a target. If it wasn't the fact, like everyone gets bullied, even if you're like the popular kid, like people
Yeah,
will
that's
bully
what I'm
you.
trying to
especially-
say.
Like if it wasn't the fact that someone was adopted, they'd make fun of like the shoes he wore one time.
Or like if you like farting is a really big deal when you're little. So if somebody thinks you farted, like or the touch where people would touch each other, and then like if someone touched you, would like kids bully
Ooh,
each other
stinky.
for absolutely everything. So I think obviously like adults can influence their children certain ways. Like if you've ever worked with kids, there's sometimes kids will say something and you're like, there's absolutely no way you came up with that yourself.
Yeah.
If you heard that from your dad or your mom. And adults aren't altruistic perfect people, so you can pick up racism and sexism and whatever at home. But if we're just talking about like general teasing and bullying, I think kids are going to do that no matter what.
Now, getting back to the actual topic of adoption, why should people adopt? Because statistically speaking, a lot of people are less likely to have kids. Less people want to conceive. We've discussed it on this show in length.
Have we?
I think so, yeah. So, with that being said, do you believe that with procreation decreasing, will adoption increase as a result?
No, I think procreation is largely decreasing because people can't afford to have children and they can't afford childcare. So I don't know how adoptions work necessarily in Canada. I know they can be really expensive. So if you can't afford to have your child like naturally, biologically, and you're fertile and you're perfectly able to, and you just choose not to because you can't afford it, you're probably not going to be able to afford adopting a kid. And regardless of even if it were free, if you can't afford a child, you can't afford a kid. So you're probably not going to adopt one if you can't afford one.
Yeah, I think the adoption. I always like Amara said, I don't know the standards that Canadians have, but I imagine that they would not allow a child to go into a home that was at risk. I'll say financially or otherwise. So.
Yeah.
Like people can conceive children even if they're
That's true.
at risk. So I see that it probably, I don't think there's a correlation. I think just people can't afford to have children, or the culture doesn't celebrate motherhood or fatherhood in the way it used to.
Now, to play devil's advocate, you both say that it might be more expensive to adopt than to conceive. But say you adopt somebody who is 15 or maybe 10, all of the expenses of them growing up are already dealt with.
Not
right?
all of them. You still have to clothe and feed and house them.
Right. But a lot of the initial costs, all the, flu shots and stuff like that, and the initial caring for the child as it is a baby, and a lot of, taking time off work to care for it, hiring a nanny, stuff like that. Would that maybe incentivize people because it's an option?
I think I don't know, like I don't have any stats, but who's most likely to adopt? Because if you're looking to start a family, you're probably not going to adopt a 15-year-old. I think we've all heard of like teenagers and older kids who don't get adopted as often, and that's pretty sad. But I think again, I just feel like if you're not able to afford having a child biologically, you're probably not going to bring a child into your home regardless. Like I don't think young people, who I'm going to assume adopt more often than older people, they're probably not in a financial position to have a child of any age. So I think, and then people are obviously more reluctant to adopt older children because it's going to be harder to integrate them into the family because they've already lived a long life.
You're right about that, about the older children, because, according to the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Society, youth aged 16 to 18 are the highest represented age group in care. So it's a lot harder for them to be taken out of there. Sam, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I believe that most of the costs associated with raising a child is in the first couple years because of daycare or because they're growing so quickly, the cost associated with new clothes, etc., is very high. Like you could buy clothes and then a month later it wouldn't fit. So I think generally, but then you could also say like when they're older, they're more into clubs. So it'd be interested to find out how that actually spreads out over their whole life.
Right. So let's move forward to the next portion of our discussion, which is what makes good parents. Who qualifies as good parents? Because we've seen, a good example is Modern Family. What do you have against Modern Family?
Have you ever watched an episode of Modern Family?
I do. I truly enjoy it. Do you enjoy it, Amara?
Yeah, it's a fine show. I mean, we know what his problem. I don't know why we do this. We always do this. But
well,
did you think Samuel was going to be a fan of the show Modern Family before you asked?
I mean, it's just the question because
no,
I'm
I
setting
understand
up
what
for
you're
our viewers.
saying, but you seem a little surprised that he groaned. I just feel like it's
There's more to
not
it.
surprising.
There's a lot to the show. I think the writing is hilarious, but let's talk about it. What makes good parents?
I don't know. I mean, it's a big question. In terms of adoption, I'm sure that adoption agencies have some criteria, but I think the most important thing is for kids to be put in safe, nurturing homes.
I agree with that.
Okay, but let's talk about who can adopt, who should be able to adopt. Do you think that anybody should be able to adopt?
Absolutely not.
Well, what do we should I be able to just go adopt a kid?
I know
no.
where he's going. I know where he's going.
We know where he's going, but I want him to really go there because
before we
I
talk
think,
about the obvious, I think that someone has a criminal record.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends what the crime is.
Okay, but if you're a domestic abuser
Yes,
or
of course not.
you're a predator,
Of course not.
obviously.
You're
And
on the sex offender.
One at a time, please.
No, we're agreeing. If you're on the sex offender registry, I highly doubt any adoption agency is going to be like, yeah, here's a baby. And
I don't think we.
If you have a history of violent offenses, I'm saying, if you were arrested for marijuana possession, a personal amount of weed in 1995, I don't think that should disqualify you from being an adopted parent. But I think if you were, or if you're arrested for drunk driving, then
Yeah, definitely not.
But I think that if you were, but me, I'm not a criminal. I don't have a criminal record, but I'm also an unmarried, not even graduated, 21-year-old. So I don't think I should necessarily just be able to walk out with a baby either. I think that there should be a cohesive family structure and financial, backing.
Right. So, Sam, right away you said no. Why do you think not everybody should be able to adopt?
Or you should who should not be able to adopt?
Well, that's why I asked who can adopt, who should be able to.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. It's just so sure we can frame it that way. Who do you think shouldn't be able to adopt, Sam?
Other than what we've already mentioned.
People who are at risk of unstable home situations, people, let me think of this, financially unstable, mentally unstable, or I'd even say people who have had divorces in the past. I don't know if that's something they take into account, but why would you want to put a, let's say, vulnerable child into a situation where they could be the victim of a divorce again? I don't know if you're likely to have one divorce, are you more likely to have divorces again in the future, or if it's one and that's it? But I imagine they kind of take that into calculation.
I think it's probably contextual. I obviously disagree with people who've had divorces and be able to adopt kids. But also there are people who get married at 18, and have a shitty marriage and get divorced at 21. I don't think that, and then, meet somebody at 26 and have a long, happy marriage. So I don't think that they should necessarily be disqualified from adopting a kid.
Yeah, it's contextual.
If you want to give a child a home, I think, again, like I said, safe and nurturing, but I think we should do that. I would rather have more kids in adopted homes than in children's aid care and group homes.
So now I'm going to ask the question that everybody's wondering. Should same-sex couples be allowed to adopt? What do you think, Samuel?
Because of things I will happily mention as the show goes on, I'd probably not. There's a lot of evidence. I did a couple hours of research. I want to just go at Elliot's pace.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so in the notes you said that same-sex couples have the same or a lower divorce rate than.
Yeah, I read that they have a lower divorce rate than straight couples.
I looked that up, and I couldn't really find any information to support that.
Did you find any to negate it?
I found one that said a study in 2004. This is the Washington Post, very reputable. Same-sex couples have the same divorce rates as heterosexual couples.
It's a smoking gun.
Yes, so that's I want to be unbiased, and that is something I found in 2004. But the trend I found was that since same-sex marriage has been legal for a less amount of time in North America, in the studies I found, like the one I mentioned, the Washington Post was the U.S., there's less data available to kind of discern whether the divorce rates or any kind of statistic associated with same-sex and heterosexual marriages are different. So what I found was information from Europe. And there was a Dutch study. I have this all here. A Dutch study found that 7 to 8 outside affairs for each person every year. That's just a footnote, but it said that it was specifically in Amsterdam. They were tracking rates of HIV and AIDS transmission, and they found that if you are a homosexual male in a monogamous relationship, that you were, on average, likely to have 7 to 8 outside affairs per person each year. So combined in the whole couple will be 14 to 16 people. And then also in Europe, homosexual couples have higher divorce rates. In Norway and Sweden, which was one study I have that they looked at, homosexuals are 50% more likely to divorce, and lesbians are 2/3 times more likely. And that was something in the National Review, which I think is Ben Shapiro's publication, I believe.
So,
or maybe Tucker Carlson's. I can't remember.
But let's talk about.
It was sourced. Sorry.
Let's talk about though a monogamous relationship. They've been together for a long time. If a child, for example, is difficult to adopt, is it better that they be stuck in the system rather than going to a willing and loving same-sex family?
Sure. I think that's more of criticism of the condition that our foster care system is in.
But the condition exists. There are children in those situations.
Sure. And the first, if I had some kind of influence in that situation, I would have some kind of initiative to improve the conditions in the foster care. Because even if the option is, but to that you mentioned, it's irresponsible. I think.
What's irresponsible?
That the foster care system. I mean, in popular discussion, I think everyone knows that it's not a nice place. I would say, and from people that I've known that have been in it,
right, it's
not a terribly nice place. So that would be the focus of my attention would be improving the foster care system.
But if nobody wants to adopt that child, and a same-sex couple comes forward, and they're, you're against that.
Yeah, probably.
I think that a lot of the concerns about I don't know. I think a lot of this is just used to disguise people who just, aren't comfortable with gay couples and aren't comfortable with gay people raising children.
Well, it's not that because it's based on evidence.
I think that I was also speaking.
Okay, wait.
I think that
I'm being slandered.
I think.
Okay, so let's let Samuel, and then we'll come back to you.
I don't believe I have any irrational hate or whatever for homosexuals. Cassidy made an interesting comment. I have something that relates to that. This is the DOJ in the U.S., the Department of Justice. So reputable. Homosexuals have a 15.4% of homosexual males, I believe the study said, were physically attacked by their partner versus 10.8% of heterosexual males. And the figures for lesbians or homosexual women are much more different. Shocking, actually, when I read it. 39% of homosexual women have either been raped, attacked, or stalked by their partner versus 21.7% of heterosexual women that live with a man. So that 39% chance, I remember reading, was women that not necessarily are married to other women, but cohabitate.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is a difference, and you can have an opinion rather if they should adopt or not, but I think to ignore the stats that are from reputable sources.
I got like a sentence out, so I didn't have a chance to ignore anything.
Okay. But I think the fact that these stats exist should be factored into the discussion, and to say that any aversion to the idea of homosexuals adopting is just prejudice or ignorance is
I didn't say much, so I didn't say that.
Okay,
but
no.
I think that there's a lot of statistics about poverty and things like domestic violence. So I think that we need to, poor people can't adopt kids. So True. But there's also high rates of domestic violence in certain like racial groups and interracial marriages. I think that, like you said, at the end of the day, I think that the family itself should be evaluated. I don't think that people like submit applications to adopt a child and then you get one in the mail. So there's
Maybe a very small child, you get one.
I don't think that happens. As far as I know, it's a very extensive and expensive. It can be. Should have probably done more research on Canada's adoption system, but you hear that it's very expensive to adopt a kid, and most of the time people want to adopt like newborn babies, right? And there's a lot of vetting that goes on. So I think that I can acknowledge that there are higher rates of domestic violence. I'll believe you and the comment in same-sex relationships. I think, as a side note, that kind of makes sense because I think you're more likely to physically fight somebody of the same gender than you are if somebody like that's a man or a woman. I think that in a straight marriage, like as a woman at least, this is so off topic, but we kind of, society really looks down on men hitting women. So you know that, and you hear a lot about like men who are battered. So you know that if you were to hit your husband, adults should never be hitting each other in a conflict. Let's just say that first. But I think you kind of know that I feel like it's just kind of like unfair, because if your husband's like a decent man, he's probably not going to hit you back, and you shouldn't just like wail on somebody for any reason. And then I think as a man, it's even more like men tend to be bigger and physically stronger than women, so you're not going to like fight your wife. But like usually out in public, girls fight each other and boys fight each other. So I think that it makes more sense that same-sex couples would do that more often. But I think that if there is domestic violence, there's usually like a police history, like just neighbors and stuff will call the cops. So if there's a history of domestic violence in the relationship or the marriage, then they should absolutely not be able to adopt a kid. But I think if we have, like you said, a monogamous, safe, no bad history, same-sex couple, I don't see why they shouldn't be able to adopt a child.
And we do have two comments that came in. Cassidy said same-sex couples have higher rates of domestic violence. It's roughly 3% versus 1% for same-sex couples. Source is Stats Canada. Domestic violence between partners often bleeds into parenting and often results in the abuse of children. Then we have Elena, who counters and says foster care is the worst place to be. And if homosexual parents getting divorced is such an issue, does the same go for a single parent looking to adopt on their own?
Well, to reply to the first one, absolutely, like children should not, even if children aren't, like, I think she kind of meant that parents, if you're aggressive physically with your partner, you're probably more likely to be physically aggressive with your children, which is obviously awful. And even if you're not, and the children just witness domestic violence, that's horrible and so damaging. Kids who witness domestic violence have like PTSD after that. So you should absolutely, like, it's bad enough that there are children born into those situations. We should not put children into those situations. But again, like I said, I don't think couples apply for an adoption and a baby comes in the mail. I think that they're vetted heavily and it should be contextualized. So if it's a same-sex couple that have a history of getting cops called on them for physically fighting, obviously they should not be able to adopt a kid. But if it's a same-sex couple that has a very good history and seems like a, good couple as far as the vetters know, which is the standard they use for all couples who adopt children, then they should be able to adopt a kid. And obviously, I think if, like we just mentioned, foster care is a pretty horrible place to be. And if it's a safe and happy, nurturing same-sex family, I don't see why they shouldn't be able to adopt a child.
So obviously, in your point of view, you don't think that the sex of the parents should be taken into account, obviously. You just think that it's about the loving home, and if it's a safe place.
So maybe because domestic violence rates are higher for same-sex couples, maybe then a smaller proportion of same-sex couples who apply will be able to adopt a child, just because that might come out. More of the couples who apply that are same-sex might have domestic violence histories. But again, like I've said, if they don't have, I don't think anybody's advocating for placing a child in a home where the parents are usually physically fighting each other. So if it's a safe and nurturing home, I think if they're a gay couple, more power to them, and I'd rather that kid be with them than in the foster care system.
Now, let's talk about the actual kids that are being adopted and who's adopting them, not based on sex, but based on race. The argument has been made that white couples adopting non-white children, or vice versa, somebody of a different race adopting somebody of not the same race, could potentially whitewash their culture. What is your response to that? So
culture and race are obviously connected, but I don't think that they're inherent. Like if you're a black baby, a lot of babies are adopted from overseas. So let's talk about African babies, for example. Yeah. So if a white couple adopts, which happens with a lot with celebrities, if a white couple adopts an African baby, they're going to raise a black kid, right? And then people might say that, a criticism might be that they're not connected to their black culture, but they were born in Africa, so where they were born, if they stayed there, they wouldn't be connected to Black American culture at all. So what I'm trying to say is culture is not necessarily inherent, and I think that if you're adopting a child of a different race than you should maybe try to just, I guess, understand it. And it might be hard for a kid to grow up in a community that's very homogenous and they're not of that race, but I think it's better to be an African or Chinese baby with a white family than be in an orphanage in a third world country.
So, Sam, what would you say to that? Would you ever adopt, and that goes to you as well, would you ever adopt a baby that is of a different culture than you? Do you feel
I
you would?
I think, I would. I would.
Sam?
Not personally, just because I wouldn't. Well, I want to mention briefly what you said about I think the celebrities adopting
Black African babies.
or Asian babies. I think that's very much like a status thing that they do to a signal
I
that
don't
they're
think
very.
so.
You don't think so?
I think that's kind of like non-white people aren't accessories.
I know, but don't you think that sometimes they
I don't
treat
know.
them like that?
I think that
You think they do it for attention and to do it to,
it's
like, as a
physically
status
clear
quo?
that you adopted a child if you're a white person who has a white partner and you have a Black baby or an Asian baby. So maybe that way they're trying to show how altruistic they are. But I still think, like, even if that's the case, the kid's probably better off with them.
Sam, back to you.
I just don't, like you said, the differences between culture and transplanting someone from one area where they might be more familiar easily to.
Well, they'd be physically familiar.
Sure. But they'd be more comfortable
With
blending
with
in,
themselves,
adapting to that
and-
I
culture.
don't think that a baby adopted from Nigeria and like that was adopted as a newborn baby and grew up in like California would feel more comfortable in Nigeria than California.
But what I'm talking
or
about,
any country that's not Nigeria.
what I'm talking about though is if, say, a Nigerian couple in California adopts the baby versus a Russian couple in California adopts the baby.
I think I don't think that you're genetically predisposed to I don't know, like exhibit certain cultural things. I think things like culture and race are connected, but they're not the same thing. So I think physically it'll probably be easier for the Nigerian couple to, raise the Nigerian baby. And there are cosmetic things like Black people have different hair types than non-Black people. So that might be difficult for a white family to figure out. But like I said, I think that if you were adopted from like an African country or China as a baby, and you grew up somewhere else in North America, you're as a grown-up person, or probably as soon as you're like conscious of yourself in the world, you're not going to feel more comfortable in that home country than with your parents, because your parents and that culture is what you grew up in and what you know.
I think.
Would you be against international adoption then?
No, absolutely not. I think that we know that there are like crises in other countries with orphans, so if people can help them, I think they should be helped. And I think that if there even is a conversation to be had about the culture, then that should be had when there are a lot less babies that need homes.
Yeah, I would. If you're really concerned about a large influx suddenly of orphans from I'm thinking about the Rwandan genocide or whatever conflict is in the recent history in Africa, or even not necessarily Africa, but
Right.
Wouldn't the best thing to do was to donate money to, I don't know, whatever the equivalent of a foster care system is in those countries? The problem.
No.
Okay, the problem I would have is I feel like in a way I would be hampering the child's development if I transplanted them from one society and culture that naturally they'd be more acclimatized to, and putting them in a society or a culture, whatever you want to describe it as, where they feel more foreign. Maybe they have more internal conflicts about identity. I think identity, if you don't have a healthy identity, you're more likely to adopt unhealthy markers of your own personality, whether that can be, habits, hobbies, whatever, religion, whatever. But I think that identity is very important, and it would have to. This is very complicated to discuss.
It's very complicated.
I think it would be over. You'd be
hurting them.
I think it would be overlooked if you didn't take into account the fact that a child would be more comfortable and, I guess, feel like they belong in a society and a culture that they physically, on a very primal level belong to.
So that means you're against international adoption.
I'm not against it.
Well, I think that
And to your
I
point,
wouldn't
you
make
said,
it
you said
illegal.
that going back, I
I wouldn't make it illegal.
Okay, but to your point, you said that you don't think giving money to the country is better. So why don't you expand on that?
Because I think that if we've established that Canada's foster care system or America's foster care system is horrible, I mean, imagine what a third world country in Africa's foster care system is like. It's probably 50 times worse. And I don't think that. And there's a lot of politics around foreign aid and stuff like that. Throwing money at problems doesn't tend to fix it. You usually have to really foster development in those countries, and that takes a lot more time and energy. And I don't know if it takes more money, but it takes more than just money. So I think, again, like if you're a billionaire, I obviously wouldn't shit on you for donating a lot of money to a foster care system in a third world country. But I think if you're looking to make a difference in one child's life, I think a child who comes out of the Rwandan genocide, this is off topic, but rape was a really big thing in the Rwandan genocide. So there were a lot of rape babies born out of that. So if they were put up for adoption, they're better off growing up in the States in a developed country with parents who can financially support them and like a government that functions than in wherever they ended up after the genocide. So yeah.
Now, in regards to making a change in one child's life, what's your position on Mike Holmes, he always does advertisements for that organization. You basically sponsor
like
a child in
Holmes?
Africa. He is the guy from Homes on it, yeah. But he does, he works with an organization.
Free the Children and
and you sponsor a
UNICEF
child.
and stuff like that.
You pay pennies a day and you help one child. Would
I don't
you
like
support
those,
that? You don't like those?
In general, I don't know. There's a lot of scandals. I don't know a lot about specific organizations, but I know a lot of the time the donations don't necessarily, most of them don't go to the children. They end up in the organization.
Some warlord.
And a lot of them are also religiously based, which I don't think there's an inherent problem with that. But I think if you're going into another country and trying to not force, but push maybe your religion on them, I think that there's a problem with that. And I also think there's there's a sort of like suffering or charity porn aspect to it, where there's commercials of like an African kid that's clearly malnourished with a bloated stomach, like with flies on their face staring at the camera. Like I think that's dehumanizing and it's gross. And I think that this like poverty tourism is disgusting. And I think that those are kind of ways that people in North America can be like, yeah, I'm doing my part. I'm helping out some poor African kid. And
every 60
gross.
seconds in Africa, a minute passes.
I think it's just So I think anybody who's trying to do good is good, but I would definitely push back on those sorts of organizations and the tactics they use to try to fundraise.
So let's then move to our last portion of the discussion, which is reconnecting with biological parents, family. Ancestry.ca and similar sites have allowed people to reconnect with loved ones. Has this helped society, or has it allowed for private companies to collect people's DNA for their own use?
Two separate things. I think it can both help society if people are finding biological families. And I've heard a lot of stories of people finding out like their dad's not their dad and stuff like that. And also, we should consider the fact that private companies have access to our DNA. So I think those are two separate things. I think we should consider both of them.
If you had to weigh, which one would be more important?
For me, I would do the Ancestry DNA test. So I guess I don't care too much about my DNA being in the hands of a private company.
And Sam?
You should care about your DNA in the private company. I think the conspiracy is like, oh, the government's going to take your DNA and then what, like clone you?
No, like frame you for a crime.
Yeah.
I mean, just recently, the Toronto police have been caught using some special facial recognition technology.
A lot of police departments, like I think, like Peel and Hamilton, a lot of the other ones have also admitted to it.
But I think
the government already has all of the information they want.
The risk I see sometimes discussed, but not as often as it should be, is if your genetic code is personal data in the same way any kind of personal data that Google or Facebook collects, in the sense that it has a value. And if an insurance company or someone else, I can't think of one on the top of my head, would purchase that data at a price. And that's why these home test kits tend to be very cheap. An insurance company that, say, wants to open up in a certain area in Canada or US would purchase from that company all the genetic information, I don't know at what price, of the clients or the potential clients in the area. Then they can know how to appropriately price someone. Say if there's a genetic group in, I don't know, northwestern Sweden that is more likely to have Alzheimer's, they would price them at a higher rate, and that they wouldn't know that information regardless. If they wouldn't know that information if they
DNA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's the more risk.
Yeah, it's pretty risky. Pretty. I think pretty apathetic about it. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that you should consider. And I think private companies having our DNA is a scary thing to think about. But I also see the value of the tests. But also, they're not super accurate either. So,
And why do you say that?
well, they like if you look at how they match DNA, they just kind of use like samples that they have, and obviously it's pretty correct and most of the time it's right, but like there are certain companies, for example, I think 23andMe didn't have a good West African sample size. So if a black person, so North American black people tend to be West African, like genetically, because slaves were taken from West Africa. If a North American black person would take the test, it would kind of just say like you're West African, which you kind of already know. So they're not super accurate. It depends on the sample size that the company has, but yeah, I don't know. I think that they're interesting, and I think it's interesting, just off topic, to see what genetic makeups can look like in a person, because sometimes there's people who you're like, that person's like 100% black and they're not, or that person's 100% white and they're not. People tend not to be 100% anything, especially in like the new world when you watch people's like videos. So I think that's interesting.
I think the popularity of it in North America, especially, and this was related to a comment on in the thread that I thought of, is that people have a very primal, very instinctual drive to know where they've come from, their story, their blood. And in the absence of a society that celebrates and, fortifies that kind of identity, people will pay $100 to some shady company to get even a semblance of it. So it's kind of sad in a way. Like 100 years ago, or even 200 years ago, whatever, people would know, like, this is where my ancestors come from. This is my story. This is what my people have accomplished. And now it's like, I don't know. I'm just in Toronto.
Well, I think I would push back on that. I don't think that everyone who takes the test is just having some sort of like existential crisis. I think sometimes people are just curious. And a lot of times there's like family, stories passed down. Like, I mean, around I don't know what I'm trying to say. Elizabeth Warren, you remember her whole Native American thing, because that's what her family told her. So something like that. But also a lot of, like I just mentioned, a lot of Black North Americans actually don't know where their ancestors came from because of slavery. It kind of starts and stops there. Like, my family immigrated from Jamaica. Black people aren't indigenous to Jamaica. I have absolutely no idea where my lineage goes before Jamaica. So I think that's also another reason people would take the test, just because there are people, and we're talking about adoption, there are people that don't have an idea of what their family background is, and they take the tests for those reasons.
And what do you say to people who don't want to find out who they're related to? So, for example, let's say a kid doesn't want to know who, they're related to, and then their, birth mother finds them.
I think
they don't want to know.
I think more often it's
the other way around.
Yeah, like the child will do a DNA
There's
test.
also closed and open adoptions. So open adoptions are where you're adopted and you can have interaction with your adopted or your biological parents.
Okay.
And then there are closed adoptions where it's like, I don't know, like on TV shows, you find out when you're like 18 that you're adopted, or you take a blood test and you're like, we don't have the same blood type, and your parents tell you you're adopted. That, obviously, if you're the same race, it doesn't work if you're not the same race as your adopted parents. But I mean, that's a personal thing. I don't think anyone has to connect with their biological family. And a lot of times people feel weird about it because your parents don't necessarily have to be the people that like biologically contributed to you existing. They could be I think we all know moms are more than people that just carried us. They're nurtured us for our whole lives and do until they die. So I understand why somebody might feel weird about finding their biological mom, especially if they have a really healthy adopted family. And
to end off our show today, do you believe that adoption will ever become the sole form of raising children, or will it at least grow? I don't think so, because I could see how people would make the argument that culturally we're less likely to want to have children, to want to have biological children. But I think with the economy right now, I can't see more people deciding to adopt a kid. It just seems to be getting worse. I can't see our generation and the generation coming after us being able to afford to adopt a baby. Samuel?
The affordability thing is interesting and I think true, but there's also, the cultural, the lack of religion. Like people in the past, I know specifically New France, Quebec, they'd have like 6 upwards. And like, you're a fan of Celine Dion. A child of how many kids? 14. 14.
She's the 14th child.
And that was actually fairly common.
Her mom's being late to rest this week, actually. No. So, yeah.
Sorry.
Anyway, continue.
You're apologizing to Ellie.
But
10 seconds. I appreciate it.
That doesn't exist. I don't think people would adopt 14 kids. It's a different drive, maternally or
look
paternally.
At Brangelina. Well, former Brad and Angelina.
Rich people can afford to adopt a bunch of. I think that's it's the money factor 100%. People can't afford to have 12 kids anymore.
You can afford to have children even in Canada and the US if you just lower your standards. I'm going to live in Toronto if you do.
Well, that's where we end the show today. Thank you to everyone that tuned in and that messaged us live. Thank you to you guys. We had a lively discussion. Jordan will be back next week, and
I miss
we.
him.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Well, a brand new episode of the Raben Report will be coming to you next week, same day, same time, same people. Have a great day, everyone.